And actually, we're live. We don't even have the intro. So here we go.
Here we are.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Victoria Real Estate Show. I'm Andrew Palnk with Vibe Real Estate Group, and we've got Jen Lowe here, our resident mortgage broker. Hi,
Hello.
Jen.
Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
Jean, I'm really good. I'm really good. Got here a little late. I was doing my elliptical, so I'm top of my head might be a little shiny. But yeah, it's going well. We have Jane is at a conference or some such today, so we don't have our Jane with us today. So let's dive right into it. Jen, you wanted to talk a little bit about mortgage applications, which is really pertinent right now.
Yeah, I just had an interesting. I sometimes I feel like the mortgage application process is annoying for a lot of people. So one thing is I like to call it a mortgage journey. And the application is such with me is that you can save it and go back to it. So it's not something that you have to, deal with in one sitting. If you get busy or whatever, it's not a big deal. You don't have to start all over again. Just the importance of putting in your details. So I had an application that I submitted to a credit union yesterday that I take a lot of time to make sure I've got in as many details as I can. However, it is amazing the kinds of questions that the underwriters have. For example, your dependents. How many dependents do you have? Your employer's address. When I'm underwriting your mortgage before I'm submitting it, I'm checking to see, okay, what is your employer's address? We find with the federal government and quite often the provincial government, it's hard to find addresses.
An actual address, right?
Yeah. Or you're putting in, DND, you're putting in a PO box. Lenders don't like that. So we're having to get that information. Go ahead.
It's funny that, you call it a mortgage journey, which I think is a really good way to describe it. But it's really funny how people can get so frustrated and not want to go through this process and say, oh, I've given you all the information. Why do you want more? People, they're trying to give you hundreds of thousands of dollars. So, they're going to do their homework.
And that's how it really has switched. And my dog's chewing on a bone here behind me at my office. And I was thinking about it when I shop your mortgage for you, I don't want to word it I'm shopping your mortgage for you, but it's switched that I'm convincing a lender that you are a good client and they should lend you the money. It's not the other way around. It's not right. Your credit history, if there's any late payments going back to 2010, it will trigger, and you still have that, like even a cell phone late payment. I have to provide an explanation for why there was that late payment. Are your other, questions that come up, are your lines of credit secured or unsecured? The more details we provide at the beginning, the easier of a process it is to the end.
I find that, this goes like in real estate when we're asked by our sellers, should we disclose this and this and this on our property disclosure statement? And we have a saying, if in doubt, disclose. I find that if as a buyer's agent, when I'm going through a home and you're finding a number of things that weren't disclosed that maybe could or should have been, makes you a little more suspicious. But when you see a property disclosure statement where they say actually absolutely unnecessary things that they're disclosing about, we used I don't know, just that we can hear squeaky floors above us when we're walking, when people are walking above us from the living room upstairs. You don't really need to disclose that, but when it's disclosed, you feel that much more confident. I'm sure the underwriters as well, when they see more information than they're asking for, say these people are
Another example is,
legit.
especially for women, last names, previous last names. So if your last name has changed, it triggers a requirement. Well, are you divorced? Are you separated? Why do you have a different last name?
Right.
And it is something that doesn't happen to men very often.
It could legitimately, but it's not as common.
Yeah. So that is a question that we always make sure that we're answering and making sure that that's disclosed, because that's a big no-no. If I'm saying someone is single and they've previously been divorced and oops, they have to pay child support and spousal support, and I haven't disclosed that, that's not a good thing.
Yeah, it's going to come back to you, and you're going to be, it's a big uphill battle after that to get that adjuster back on the table.
Yeah.
At the table. Yeah. And then, of course, if you're, I've heard many times that if people are shopping around for mortgage and they're going to different brokers or banks, then these adjusters could be getting the same application on their desk from a few different sources. And that's also a huge red flag, right?
Usually, yeah, if because you can see on the credit report if someone has gone to multiple lenders and why, right? So that has to be answered as well. And the concern with that is that if I'm saying that you are full-time salaried, making $75,000 a year, but another person is saying that you are self-employed and you T4 yourself, that's two totally different requirements for income documents. And that's a big red flag. So as much as I know it's frustrating and we try and make it a journey, it's just like going on your elliptical, right? It's a wonderful journey doing your mortgage application.
You are the tour guide, for this journey, and people need to listen to the tour guide and know to, stay on the path and, not, watch out for the crocodiles over there. And, it's really important that people listen to their guidance.
The details are important, and the questions I'm asking because we really need the information.
Yeah. And again, people, you're asking for hundreds of thousands of dollars. So, it may seem onerous and some of it may seem invasive, but, you don't have a right to this money, and someone has to, and they're also, I'm just going through a couple of my continuing education courses, the ethics and there's a lot of fraud out there right now. And we have to really, really be careful that everyone is properly vetted and identified, and it's getting much, much more sophisticated. So of course, it's really important to double check and triple check all of this information. What's the weirdest thing you've ever been asked for in terms of information from an adjuster?
It's all pretty standard.
Is it? Okay.
But I just had to yesterday, why this came, and I thought, I'm going to talk about that today, or that caught my interest, was the arguments that we have back to underwriters. Like I had an underwriter come back and say, I need 6 months pay stubs for this client, and the client's been employed with the federal government for 23 years. So my conversation back to them is, help me understand why you're asking for this. Nowhere, I've never been asked for this before. You should need a pay stub, employment letter, and T4, end of story.
Right.
So, and so things like that sometimes, and working with an experienced mortgage broker, I'm going to fight that. I'm not going to go back to my client and get 6 months. That's totally unnecessary.
And that could be a newer adjuster or somebody just, following some, yes, exactly.
Yeah, we deal with
recognize that. Yeah. Yeah, we recognize that too. Like when I'm working with a newer agent or, you start to know, okay, this seems a little off. Maybe I should ask some more questions about
Yeah.
what's going on
Yeah.
here. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny because you end up doing their job, but that's what comes from having that experience.
For sure. Yeah. And honestly, I mean, I do like there is a balancing act with the best rates versus working with a lender that has the best customer service, is quick, doesn't nickel and dime you, those kinds of things as well.
Right. Yeah. You can. Yes. Exactly. Okay. Anything else you wanna chat about, or have you got anything else that's been going on for you in the mortgage industry?
From a rate standpoint, I mean, we're definitely seeing fixed rates coming down, and a lot of 3 and 4 year terms have been of interest as opposed to the 5-year fixed. Definitely hearing more and more that the Bank of Canada is not willing to really shed any light on when they're expecting rates to come down, as they're being very cautious.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I feel like if they shed any light, then they affect the marketplace, and so they're waiting to just keep it zipped and silent, which means that they don't want us. Yeah,
we want them to, drop those rates, but
we really want them to drop the rates, but we don't want the foreshadowing of that rate drop to cause people to get jumping into the marketplace and build up the activity, so that then they say, okay, we still have high inflation. It's such a weird system. Yeah. Well, I mean, I've been out and about with clients lately, showing a number of properties. I've got a number of listings that are going to be coming live. We're not allowed to talk about our coming soons anymore unless we've got until it's 3 days before it goes live. So I can't really speak to those, but it's definitely seeing an uptick in the activity and the phone calls that are happening. So although, it's funny because I was just thinking about the fact that, here I've blinked and we're well past New Year's. We're into March. Spring is really here. Look outside.
Feels like it's beautiful today. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. Let's see here.
So you've noticed an increase in activity this past week?
Absolutely. Yeah. But then, it's really hard to say because it's very subjective. When I've got my own business, I might be active and someone else isn't. It's been really funny for me in my career where, I might be really slow and everyone else is just running through hoops. And then, and I'm going, where is everybody that I usually work with? Why is my phone not ringing? And then it turns around and everyone's, oh my God, it's so slow. Nothing's happening. I'm like, I've never been busier. So it's a funny business but so what I'm saying is it's really hard to say just anecdotally that things are picking up, but based on stats, they're talking about it, it's not really gangbusters out there by any means, but it does feel good, solid business as usual from a standard perspective, I would say. I do feel like inventory is building up, just a good thing. I always talk to people about timing. So many people say, well, I'm going to wait till summertime because that's the best time to sell. It's like, no, it's not. Spring is.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't understand the market cycles. I was just talking with someone yesterday about that. But the people who do come to the market here in the spring.
And you can provide statistics on certain areas too, with sales versus list prices and all that as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. In fact, let's do a quick screen share. The one. Yeah, that's the one. Okay. When we do this one. Sorry, guys. Here it is. We do this screen quite often.
Okay.
And you can see, I'm going to turn off a few of these, but this goes back to a year. If we go back multiple years, which I don't have in front of me, you will usually see a trend where you've got, it's slow in, let's go with pending sales. actually, this is not that showing it that broadly or that explicitly, but we usually see a ramp up every spring, and we can talk about that. We usually see a ramp up every spring and a sort of a slowdown in the fall, in the summer, and then a bit of a jump in the fall again. But every year is different, so it's hard to say, for sure that it's going to be the same, and especially depending on what the Bank of Canada does. If they're waiting till after the spring to make something happen, to make an announcement, then and their announcement could impact the market, and those people who have been waiting in the wings will be just coming in.
That could trigger a bigger or a busier summer this year.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So anyway, turn that off. So I think I'm going to keep it short today, unless you've got something else. I would like to one day go through, actually, what I might do is just even now, just so I've got the content, is go through the contract of purchase and sale. If you want to stay in and comment on it with me, you're welcome to, but it'll be dry, but useful, because it's going to be something that other people can reference. Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. Okay, so let's go to another share screen.
It's just like the mortgage journey. It's kind of dry, but it is important.
It's exactly right. Right, exactly. So I meet with many people to talk about, writing up an offer, and there is so much in these contracts, and they're so more complicated than they were before. I mean, when I got into this business 18 years ago, there were some agents that had been in the business for 25 years before me, still in the business, and talking about how they used to do sales on the back of a napkin in a restaurant. They would write up a contract, I will buy this house for this. And I that might be an exaggeration, but it certainly has become a lot. There's a lot more language in the contracts. It's a lot more as this market and as the industry has evolved. People try to put the best ideas that they can and the best practices into these contracts. But that does make for some pretty convoluted and confusing stuff. So I'm not going to go through an entire contract here today, but I did want to just talk about some of the high points. And certainly, Jen, do you have much involvement with contracts yourself in terms of like?
Oh, yeah. Yep. We're going through the contract, checking what the conditions are, the addendums, closing dates. I mean, there's key pieces in there for sure that we're looking at.
Yeah, and you're wanting to make sure, because I know the lenders don't really like to see cash back kind of things in contracts and that kind of thing. Okay, got it. So there's 2 pages of a contract that are not contractual. They're just more informational. I'm not going to go into them, but they're important to read, and they do get actually pretty involved. And they talk about intentional pieces of how this contract runs. And the second page does also include an area that talks about customary costs. And again, this is not contractual, but you'll find most agents will ask their clients to initial either, if it's a seller, the costs borne by the seller, or a buyer, the costs borne by a buyer. And we'll have a quick chat about it. And that's just a little bit of CYA to ensure we've had a chat about those things that we probably should have talked about before if we hadn't talked about. A lot of this stuff is already in the contract that you see in this top list. So again, just in the interest of time, I'm not going to go into it, but I may do that another day. Contracts could be, a contract could be 8 pages, no conditions, just a blank contract. Usually we add additional pages like as you referenced, the additional addendums for the conditions that there might be. There's an addendum we add a standard that is either for residential or a strata purchase, because they cover a lot of the best case scenarios for those kind of scenarios. And we also often include the seller's property disclosure statement and the title. So we'll often title and number all of those pages into the contract. There is a law, and we'll speak to this later in here, but in BC, everything in a contract, everything in an agreement has to be in writing for a residential, for a property contract in BC. So you can buy a car or a bicycle pretty much anything in BC on a handshake and have a firm and binding contract. But in BC for real estate, it has to be in writing. And so that's why we incorporate things like the title and the property disclosure statement into the contract, because otherwise they don't exist for the purposes of, being able to hold the seller's feet to the fire in terms of their disclosures. We're going to include the full legal names of the buyers and the sellers. We're going to review and confirm the legal address and proper address. One of the key elements is going to be the price, what is being offered. $1 million. And along with that purchase price offer, we're going to also talk about, actually, I'm jumping ahead there. We have a new rule around rescission period. And that means if you make an offer and you get cold feet and want to back out, you are allowed within 3 business days to back out, and you would be paying a penalty of 0.25% of the purchase price. You don't always need to use that opt-out clause because you may have your own conditions in there already, and if so, that would supersede this. But if you were to walk away for some reason outside of your conditions, or you had a condition that was a 1-day condition and it's 2 days later, you have this option. And not many people are using it, but it is there. And the reason was because when people were making multiple offers, buying properties pretty much sight unseen or without any building inspections, without actually going to their mortgage broker first, when it was that competitive, that's what we were seeing. The government brought in this requirement for a rescission period. And so it's in here and we make it explicit. This is the amount you'd be paying. If you're offering this particular price, we write that number in. You're going to have a deposit. Deposits are held in trust. They don't belong to you anymore. They don't belong to the seller. They don't belong to the mortgage broker. They don't belong to the lawyer. They don't belong to the agent or the agency. What they do belong to is the contract. So they're written and held in trust, pending the outcome of the contract. I like to say it's kind of like when you're around the table at a poker game and you've put your money into the pot. The money is now in the pot and nobody can just grab that and say, that's my money. It's waiting the outcome. So the deposit is not required contractually. We don't need a deposit because we do something called signing under seal, usually in these contracts. But it's really good form and it gives the seller a lot more confidence if you're putting up a good deposit. So it's a really helpful, useful thing to do. And I would say deposits do vary. I've seen, $100,000, $200,000 deposits. I've seen $5,000 deposits. There are many people out there that want to sell their home. They don't have a lot of available cash, but once their home is sold, they're sitting on, a very valuable property. Once their home is sold, that money is going to go towards the purchase. They can absolutely afford. They may already have their home sold contractually. They can absolutely afford to buy the home they're looking to buy, but they can't put up a lot of deposit. So that's a conversation, but deposit is a piece that sellers will look at. But the key takeaway is, again,
sorry, I'm jumping in here.
No, please do jump in.
Yeah, the deposit is something that I'm always looking closely at too, in comparing to what the clients listed for their assets. So if their down payment is coming from an RRSP, I'm making sure then, okay, well, how many days do we have to remove your financing condition? Because quite often taking money out of an RRSP can take 3 or 4 days. So depending on when you have to provide the deposit and how that's written into the agreement can create a few challenges if we're not managing that.
I'm glad there's another set of eyes on that. That's a conversation that's often, again, having, when we talk about the deposit, how much cash do you have available? And will you be able to get it when you remove your conditions? And folks, we usually have a raft of conditions, that's best practice, for example, subject to a title review or subject to a building inspection, and of course, subject to financing. And there could be, a 3-day condition, or there could be a 5 or 7 or 10 or 2 weeks. But even if that condition is 2 weeks away, we usually write the deposit that is payable within, I write it, so it's payable within a couple of days of an unconditional contract. You might be told you need 10 days to get that money out of the RRSP. You might find you get an agreement, you might get a building inspection the first day and the bank gets back to you in a perfect world really quickly. And then you say, oh, I'm good to remove my conditions. even though I have 2 weeks in order to do it. But you've got to consider that deposit, because if you can't access those funds, you might want to wait before you trigger that 2 days that the deposit's due after, remove your conditions later. It's like a lot of subtleties, but it's just things to think about and talk about. It won't affect many people, but it is really like where it does, it's really key. So thanks for jumping in on that. Deposit can be held by the brokerage. It most often is by the buyer's brokerage. It can also be held in a lawyer's trust account. It's really important that it is held in what's called in trust. Otherwise, if it's held in a lawyer's account and it's not added to be in trust, then there are circumstances where the seller could instruct the lawyer, if it's in the seller's lawyer's account, to say, well, release those funds to me, and they can be released because they haven't been put in trust. That's why that's a really kind of key piece. There's a terms and conditions area here where we add additional terms and conditions. So this is some of the boilerplate additional terms that I would generally add to a contract. Some I'll remove, of course, if it doesn't apply, like septic or tenancy. But there's room, folks, for us to add addition. If you have concerns about what you're buying or you want to add an additional term or condition, we can put it in here or on the addendum page where we have our more typical conditions. Completion is the day that it completes when the money and the title are exchanged. The possession is the date you get the keys. You could be subject to a tenancy, so we want to be writing in sort of language around that just to confirm what it is and do all of that. Adjustments are the dates from which all of your property taxes, your strata fees, your your water bill might be adjusted from. So that can differ from the completion possession dates. They usually line up. Included items, a lot of people aren't sure what's included in a home. And I actually learned this from Jane, the way she describes this, but she said, if you imagine the house as a dollhouse and you picked it up and shook it, those things that stayed attached, didn't jumble around, would be the things that are considered included. And the rest is now a mess. But
that's a good way to describe it.
It is, because what's included is anything that's permanently fixed. So a hanging mirror is not permanently fixed. So in the bathroom, sometimes they're just a hanging mirror. Technically, we should write that in. Otherwise, the seller does have the right to remove it. But a dishwasher, although I usually write that in just to be explicit, it's plumbed and permanently attached. It's considered included. But the washer, dryer, the stove, the fridge, those are not considered included. So we usually write those in. And typically these days, I'm finding, when I first got in the business, people were always negotiating their appliances. They wanted to bring their washer and dryer with them, the fridge and stove, to their new place. Nowadays, it's been a long time since I've experienced anybody saying I'm taking that with me.
Well, actually, just going back up to the completion date versus the possession date. For that one, it is always nice when usually the completion date is 1 day before the possession date. And that really honestly is just to make sure there's no delays with the money transferring. No issues.
And I've seen that so many times. Yeah. And especially because, folks, there's domino effect where your completion might be the buyer's money for your sale might be dependent on the buyers having sold their home to someone who actually had sold their home to someone who had sold their home to someone. And if all of those completions and possessions are lined up on the same day, that's a lot of money to flow in step before it actually happens. And you're going to probably not get your keys that day. Because even though the contract says you're going to get your keys on the same day as the completion, if it doesn't complete that day, but number one, you're in breach of contract, although lawyers are generally pretty good at working that out. And number two, you're not going to get your keys unless the money's changed hands. There's undertakings and agreements and trouble if we give out keys before it's been exchanged, unless we got the seller's explicit permission. So yes, best practice is we usually make a gap of 1 day at least. And sometimes it's more with those domino effects. There's a central buy and sell, and then there might be someone else on either side of it, someone who's it gets a little more complicated, but of course, if you're giving the keys, if you sold your home and then need to give the keys to the new buyers, and then you've bought a home and need to get keys from that home you're buying, you might want to get the keys for the home you're buying first before you give the keys to the people who bought your home. So you might want to have a day between giving them the keys and moving out. So you can actually sometimes get a 2 or 3 day gap between completion and possession.
Right.
So yeah, that was a really good point. We often will exclude items, both because this is a really good conversation to have. I talk to my sellers quite often about, is there anything that you that would normally be considered included that you want to make sure is removed on completion, and that could be in a family heirloom, an old beautiful lamp, the built-in fixture or some hardware on a door that you want to make sure you take with you. I advise generally just remove it beforehand so the buyers aren't falling in love with it and it doesn't become a negotiation issue. But if you can't remove it beforehand, let's make it really explicit, and it needs to go into this excluding section. And sometimes buyers will also write in, excluding the junk in the backyard, which some sellers might take a little bit of offense at, but there's also a lot of places that I've seen where it's really important you do that. Otherwise, you're buying a mess. The place is not going to be exactly like you made your offer when you get your keys. It's going to be substantially as viewed. It's not going to be exactly the same. But if it's substantially different, then there's a breach of contract, right? That's why it's important to keep insurance on the place. Of course, there's a fire, there's at least a way for it to get remedied back into the way it was. But it's really important people understand it's not going to be exactly the same, but it will be substantially the same. And that's another thing that I warn people about, because we often are viewing tenanted properties or properties where maybe the sellers are not the cleanest of people. And, you're not guaranteed a clean house. They're not going to be bringing in cleaners, and you might be finding the place that truly is substantially as viewed when you viewed it. And that can include, the dust webs and the cobwebs and the dust balls and the dirty fridge, all of that. So
but you could write that into the contract if you wanted to for a buyer, or
you can. Thank you.
You could take care of it yourself, because I would want to
clean
it the way
it's all about understanding. Yeah, exactly. Like, what's the benefit versus the cost of, if I put in there that the seller will have it professionally cleaned before they leave,
I do that quite often.
How much money are they going to spend to have it professionally cleaned? Is it going to be done to your satisfaction still?
Yeah.
Are you better off just taking that, getting your keys and giving yourself another day before the movers come in and paying professional cleaners to come in yourself? Or are the sellers going to not take your offer because they're looking at 3 different offers, and yours is the only one that says they have to have it cleaned and everything else is equal? Or they just get insulted? So it's just some of the subtleties there. This one gets confusing to people, and even to me, and it's really good to have a lawyer review some of these things in advance if you are at all confused. I'm going through this in a general sense, so let's not, I'm not a lawyer, folks. So title: free and clear of all encumbrances except subsisting conditions, provisos, restrictions, exceptions, and reservations, including royalties, contained in the original grant or contained in any other grant or disposition from the Crown, registered or pending restrictive covenants and rights of way in favor of utilities and public authorities, existing tenancies set out in Section 5, if any, and except as otherwise set out herein. Did you understand that?
No, I was just saying this is where we're relying on our tour guide.
Yeah.
Proviso.
Proviso.
Yeah.
How do you pronounce that? Hey, Google. No, Google's listening to me. Google's always listening to you. So titles will often have a mortgage, right? And it will be free and clear of the mortgage because it's not counted here. It should be free and clear of a lot of different charges on title that are more transitory, I guess, in nature. But it will not be free and clear of, for example, a right-of-way or an easement and that sort of thing. And so it's really important to understand, and this is why we make a condition subject to title in our, if we're a little unclear about what may be effective of a charge on the title, for you to then go and get deeper advice from your tour guide, in this case, the lawyer. A lot of titles are really clean and clear. And as agents, we can say, this is going to be this is what's here. There's a mortgage. There's a right of way. There's a undersurface rights to the Queen. These are things that we can explain and talk about. But sometimes it's really complicated, and we say go talk to the lawyer. Money nowadays is expected. We don't bring us a bunch of cash for a deposit, and don't bring a bunch of cash to your lawyer's office at closing. The tender for the sale is going to be certified check, bank draft, wire transfer, or a lawyer, notary's, or real estate broker's trust check. That's what's defined for the tender for this transaction. Lawyers are asking that we cross off this by 4 p.m. now, because I guess they're working later. And they don't want to be restricted to having everything done by 4 p.m. They can now do digital online registration. It used to be you had to be at Land Title Office before it closed at 4 p.m. So best practice, we cross this off. So people ask, why are you crossing that off? That's why. So we get into some requirements that are legislative. So, seller needs to deliver to the buyer on or before the completion date a statutory declaration of the seller containing particulars regarding the seller. I don't even get into this myself. This is to do with lawyers. Let's put it this way, guys. The contract has a number of elements in it. Some of them are around the agreement that you're making between yourselves as buyer and seller. Some of them are instructions for the lawyers. Some of them are legislative requirements around that the lawyers will be dealing with for information that might be collected about you for, again, the purposes of the transaction, or to confirm, in this case, that you're not a foreign entity selling a local property where they may have to do some withholding tax. Jen, any comments?
It's interesting that because where is the piece about the property transfer tax? Is that on the first page? Because I remember, years ago, I always make sure that clients are aware of the property transfer tax, how much it is.
Yes.
Because, it's been a long time, but when I first started, if you don't properly disclose that and clients are short, that's on me. I should have made sure that I explained that. Having it just noted on there as a closing cost, it doesn't, it's thousands, it can be thousands of dollars. So you got to be short.
Absolutely. And Carol Kerr actually 3 minutes ago said there's a clause for that. So I'm not sure at what point we were talking about, but Carol, can you jump in with that? And thanks for watching. Which clause, and maybe even share it.
For the property transfer tax?
I think it might have been around maybe cleaning. I'm not sure, but.
Okay.
I'm not sure. We'll see what she says if she's still watching. But in terms of and Carol's great agent that is in our brokerage, and she works more up island. And she and I have had some back and forth recently around the costs of closing, because I use a spreadsheet that I work with my buyers and talk about, exactly that: property transfer tax. This is what you're going to be paying. This is what it's going to cost you to buy. This is what it's going to cost you to sell. And also, again, when we do go through the contract, to more specifically to your point, when we first talk about customary costs, we do have a section in there around property transfer tax. And when we do get our clients to initial this, we're not just saying initial here. I mean, at least I'm not. We're going to talk about, what you might expect to pay for lawyer fees. They vary, but we see some general ranges. The cost of mortgage suggests that they talk to their lawyers, or sorry, to their lender. Talk a little bit about fire insurance, and what applicable taxes might be, and definitely the biggest one here is the property transfer tax we talked about. So Carol was talking about.
Oh yeah, that's great.
Carol was talking about the clause, Santa Claus. She's using voice to text, I'm sure, about title being free and clear. Right? Yes. So there's an additional clause you can add as well. Because there is some confusion around this gets into some of the subtleties, but there's some confusion around some of the language there for the title, that there are some easements and rights of way to a utility that might still remain where it says they're going to be gone. So we need to get clear on that. That's right, Carol. That's what you're referring to, I think. I hope. So we talked about that. So again, GST certificate, this is going to have usually to do with new construction. And again, most people just skim over these, and including myself, honestly. But if it looks like GST might be applicable or exempt, if it's not exempt, the seller and the buyer will execute and deliver to the other party on or before the completion date an appropriate GST certificate with respect to the transaction. This stuff, again, is usually just handled by lawyers. But, if you think GST might be applicable, it's really good. I've highlighted some of these clauses here where I think it's really important that we talk about them. Time is of the essence. This whole contract revolves around time. If you don't do things in the time that they're set out for, you're in breach of contract. So even, you're making an offer and you make it open until midnight for the seller to accept. If you get acceptance the next morning from the seller, that's not an accepted offer because the offer revolves around time and your offer was only open till midnight. If you have until Tuesday to remove your conditions and you remove them Wednesday, you again the contract is generally unraveled. Get legal advice. You probably are no longer in a contract. If you don't put your deposit in place in time that it's stated, again, breach of contract. You haven't met your obligations. So it's without this clause in here, it makes it, I guess, a little bit more willy-nilly. But with this clause in here, it just says the very center of this contract is time. So everything has to happen in a timely manner. This buyer financing one, and this is really applicable to you. There's a situation where lenders are requiring that the title be registered before they release funds, right? Some lenders.
Yeah.
And so the lender is saying, I'm not going to give the money to the buyer until the title is registered in their name. But the seller is saying, why would I register the title in your name when I don't have the money? So there's got to be some clauses in here that give direction to the lawyers to ensure that everyone has undertakings in place. So you end up in this standoff otherwise where everybody's saying, I'm not giving you the money until I've got the title. Well, I'm not giving you the title until I've got the money. So this really helps to clarify the instructions to the lawyers. Again, one of the main things in here. You have a tail again, Jen.
Sorry. I thought today I would bring Louie. This is my Bernese mountain dog.
Oh, fun.
I don't know if I can't lift her up high enough.
You can't lift her up.
Everyone gets to see the tail. Yes.
And so again, this second part, clearing title, is related to this one as well. If there are financial charges to be cleared from title, the seller is required to clear those charges, but they can wait to pay them off. For example, the mortgage, until they've received the purchase price. So again, these both revolve around each other. They're both interconnected and related, and really important. But they're confusing to a lot of people. Like, what is this? That's the intention. I like to talk about intention. Like, I'm not a lawyer. I don't know all of the legal ramifications of every particular comma or use of the wording. But when we understand the intention, it really helps us to understand the purpose behind the contract. So costs, this goes back to that costs when we referred to before, but the buyer bears the costs of conveyance, and if applicable, any costs relating to arranging a mortgage. The seller bears the cost of clearing title. So that just makes it clear who pays for what. A really key one a lot of people don't get is this one here around risk. So all buildings on the property, all other items included in the purchase price will be and remain at the risk of the seller until 12:01 a.m. on the completion date. After that time, the property will be, and all included items will be at the risk of the buyer. Hey, it's 12:01 a.m. That's just after midnight of the day before that you're no longer required to keep coverage on the property.
Sorry. Hey.
So this may not seem like a big deal. Yeah, that jump scare.
Louis.
There's some real sort of subtle elements to this that people should be aware of. In fact, so number one is the seller technically is no longer required to keep the property insured, even though they still own it until the money is transferred. The buyer is required to have insurance before they own it. But then there's also
12:01, the morning of the completion date. They have to have insurance in place.
And completion may not happen until 6 p.m. that evening, right? If they're working late. So it's really important, though, that you sellers don't cancel your insurance that day, because remember, we were talking earlier, there might be a delay, and maybe the completion doesn't happen. And, and buyers don't get insurance for the day you get possession. If possession is the next day, you want to put insurance already in place on that completion date. The day before you actually get your keys. You may not get your keys for 2 or 3 days after you've, depending on what the situation in the contract says. The other, I used to work in insurance years ago, a different life, but a really good idea is to find out who the seller is insured with, and consider maybe using that same insurance company, because let's say there was a fire that started at 11 p.m. on the day before completion, starts to damage the property, and then it's completely gutted or not completely gutted, but there's been some damage. Let's say it's just a water leak. Doesn't matter. Whatever it is, there's damage that's been happening between, that covers the span of a couple days. You've got 2 insurance companies fighting about who pays, or you have one.
That's a good point.
It's a small, subtle thing, but it's kind of a fun one to consider. The plural, we're moving on here. But folks, just make sure you've got coverage, and that and actually, Jen, this is really pertinent to you. It's really important that you have your property covered and insured, because if you are getting a mortgage, what are the lenders going to be doing? Have the lawyers confirming at completion before they release the funds?
They have to have, really honestly, yes. Prior to removing all your conditions, you got to make sure that you can get insurance on the property.
Yeah. And that's a confusing one for some buyers, because I tell them, you don't actually have to have insurance in place. You don't even have to have insurance confirmed, because, you might be not completing for 4 months.
Right.
But you do need to know that you can get insurance on this property, that the property is insurable, and also as important, you are insurable, that you haven't had a bunch of claims and there's no insurance company that wants to touch you.
Yeah.
So those two things have to happen, because at completion date, if you don't have insurance in place at that time, you're not going to get your money. The plural piece just sort of says that not only when you sign this contract, it also binds your heirs, executors, administrators, successors, and assigns. And that singular includes plural and masculine includes feminine. I'm not sure of all the legal reasons for why that happens, but it does ensure that it gives, I guess, some more flexibility to the contract if there was an estate situation that arose. And that certainly has happened. I've had properties where my clients have agreed to buy a property and the seller passed away before closing. And so it bound the estate to continue to work with them for the sale. But it gets into some strange, there is, again, talk to your lawyers and some strange legal stuff. This one, I should double highlight and underline. I'll read it again. There are no representations, warranties, guarantees, promises, or agreements other than those set out in this contract and the representations contained in the property disclosure statement, if incorporated into and forming part of this contract, all of which will survive the completion of the sale. So this is what I was saying earlier. If it's not in writing, it doesn't exist in this contract. If the seller has said, yeah, I'll get that fixed, don't worry about it, just to you verbally, you can't rely on that. Not legally. You can't hold their feet to the fire. If it's not in the contract, just make sure it's in the contract, folks, if you're at all concerned. Any comments, Jen?
That's where, yeah, those addendums or what have you are so important.
Really important. So we are now required both, there's the Personal Information Privacy Act, PIPA, is it? I think I said that right. My partner just parroted me. So we need to collect personal information from people, usually for the purposes of the contract and the transaction. And so this clause just makes it explicit and reminds people of how and why we may want to use their information. Personal information provided by the seller may be stored on databases outside Canada, which case it would be subject to the laws of the jurisdiction in which it is located. I keep my contracts in Dropbox, which is an online cloud storage system. So it's really important that be, this allows, makes it not explicit, but provides for the fact that it's been somewhat disclosed, if that's of concern to people. And a lot of this that we're talking about today has nothing to do with buying and selling a house. It's more like, well, it does and it doesn't. It's CYA. It's instructions to lawyers.
CIA.
Yeah. CIA. Oh, yeah. No, that's true. This has to do with CIA.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. No, people are concerned about the fact that the U.S. And some of their various acts allow for access to our personal information that may be a little more invasive than perhaps our laws in Canada. This has to do with, this again is for the purpose and benefit really of the realtors. It just assigns remuneration around the commission that the seller is paying for the sale that allows for that remuneration to flow to the buyer's agent. So the buyer and seller agree the seller's authorization and instruction as set out in 26C below is a confirmation of the equitable assignment by the seller in the listing contract is notice of the equitable assignment to anyone acting on behalf of the buyer or seller. Let's go down to 26C, see if I was right. There is no, there is C. Authorizes and instructs the buyer and anyone acting on behalf of the buyer or seller to pay the commission out of the proceeds of sale and forward copies of the seller's statement of adjustments to the cooperating listing brokerage as required. Okay. Isn't this fun, folks? We've got some people who are still watching, so I'm really happy.
Yay!
This is a new, relatively new legislation, and this has to do with back in the day when in Vancouver, I think the Vancouver Sun dropped that bomb and talked about shadow flipping. And you may not have heard this before, or this may be new to you, or this might be old news, but there was a time when property values were going up so rapidly in Vancouver that somebody could go knock on a door, agree to buy a property at face value, at actual value, and then, a month later, sell that contract to another party and get an extra $100,000 in difference. So assigning a contract is selling a contract, and selling a contract means all contracts are assignable unless they're explicitly not assignable. So if I agree to buy a car from you and you've agreed to sell me this Porsche for $500, I can walk down the street and I don't even have to register the Porsche in my name before selling it. I can sell the contract to another party for $5,000, and then they would pay me the difference. They'd pay me $4,500, and what they'd pay me $5,000, I guess. But anyway, they'd pay me the difference, and I'd be making $4,500. Then they could take it then and assign it to somebody else for $50,000. And that contract could change hands a number of times. It's a valuable piece of paper until the last person holding the bag has to complete on it at completion date. But the government, in its wisdom, said, you know what, we don't like this practice of shadow flipping, and because somebody agrees to sell their home for whatever to someone that they thought was very nice, and they go to sign the documents with the lawyers and they find out that they're selling it to somebody completely differently and that the price has gone up by $500,000. They're not too happy about that. So this now restricts the assignment of a contract. You can cross this off. You can allow contracts to be assigned again by crossing this off and doing a disclosure to the seller, but it has to be really explicit. So no longer is the assignment of contract just a given. Agency disclosure just goes into who are your representatives, who are the representatives of the buyer, who are the representatives of the seller. If there's no representative, that they understand their risks and have signed an additional disclosure form. We have so many disclosure forms, folks. Oh my God. But it's, it's important. It's important. Any comments, Jen?
Everything that you're disclosing, like we're also disclosing as well. Like even just going back to the very first page where you're, disclosing, we have a fixed credit disclosure statement where we're making sure that everyone is aware what the closing costs are, legal fee, potential appraisal, all those kinds of things are disclosed again on our end. So yes.
It's good that they get this double and triple, and then they talk to their lawyer and they get, and that may seem onerous and you may get tired of hearing it and you might start to zone out. And some people just don't like legalese, or they can't sit still for 5 minutes. But this is the same thing we were talking about earlier when you're asking for, their employment history. It's all pretty important stuff. And you're buying a property worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Take the time to understand what you're doing. You'll profit by it.
Yeah.
So back in the day of the royalty, I guess, they had those signet rings and so forth, and they would, stamp their seal on wax to an order. And this is our modern equivalent. And so what we're saying here is acceptance is irrevocable. And regardless of whether there's a deposit, regardless of whether things maybe are, we'll read this. But that's the impact of the seal, is to kind of override things like needing consideration, or what's called the consideration or deposit, and some various other things. Again, talk to your lawyer. Seller and buyer specifically confirm that this contract of purchase and sale is, whether executed and sealed by hand or by digital or electronic signature and seal, or otherwise, is hereby executed under seal, which is evidenced by each of the buyer and seller making the deliberate, intentional, and conscious act of inserting their initials, whether by hand or electronically, in the appropriate space provided beside the section 22. So this is our way of getting rid of the wax. And they've made this really,
that says seal.
That's this little, exactly. I wish it was in the shape of a seal. Sorry.
You've got to make it more entertaining, right?
It would be way more fun. The parties intend that the contract, the act of inserting their initials as set out above, is to have the same effect as if the contract sale had been physically sealed by wax, stamp, embossing, sticker, or other manner, is agreed and understood that without limiting the foregoing, the seller's acceptance is irrevocable, including without limitation during the prior period to the date specified for the buyer to either fulfill or waive the terms and conditions contained herein or to exercise any option contained herein. So what I like to tell my buyers in this regard is, yes, if you make an offer, you're subject to and expected to go forward in good faith, fulfilling your conditions. Your conditions do have a number of major holes in them in terms of, walk away, get out of jail free kind of cards, because it says, subject to obtaining a building inspection to your satisfaction, subject to obtaining mortgage funding to your satisfaction. That's very subjective. It's very hard to hold your feet to the fire on something that subjective. But the seller is legally bound to sell to you if they accept your offer, and they only can look at backup offers if yours falls apart. They don't have the get out of jail free card that you do, unless they have their own conditions put in, but that's less common. So it is really important that a seller understand when there's, when they sign acceptance of an offer, that if somebody comes along the next day and offers them $100,000 more, they cannot just say, I'm done with this first contract, I don't want it, I'm going to take the second. They're stuck. Acceptance was irrevocable. For the buyer, if they made an offer without conditions, they're also stuck. It's irrevocable. If they have conditions, then it is subject to them fulfilling or waiving those conditions. So I tell people, my buyers, for example, that writing an offer in a contract, it's a big deal, but it's not as big a deal as removing your conditions. It's when you remove conditions that you've taken that major big step and said, I'm actually buying this place. And so, I've said to people sometimes, you like this place, you need to think about it, but thinking about it overnight might mean somebody else has also thought about it overnight and is now writing an offer and you're competing. You might be better off writing an offer, shoot first, ask questions later. You have the option and the right to ask those questions with the conditions we include in your offer. So it's a subtle piece, but it's an important piece. So the buyers do have the right to rescind. We talked about that for the 0.25%. And you can't waive that right. So the legislator anticipated that people might try to make their offers more competitive by waiving that right to rescind. It cannot be waived. So in a competing offer situation, some buyer might say, I want to be able to tell the buyer, I want the seller to take my offer from hell or high water. I don't want them to feel like I can walk away. So I'm going to waive. They're not allowed to. You have to give notice that you're going to waive the offer, and there's certain time frames for it. There's a price point. I'm not going to go into the depths of this. Some items are exempt from rescission rights, some types of properties. Or if the Development Marketing Act applies, that sort of supersedes. There's a right to rescind if you're buying new construction. You already have a 7-day right to rescind, and there's no fee. So that would override this. If you have questions about the rescission rights, this is a newer right that we have, and please reach out. This is my favorite clause, and I'm really surprised because they have us initial everything else, all these little additional acknowledgements and things. They don't have our clients initial this. I mean, we do initial the bottom of each page, and it's nearby. This is my favorite clause in the entire contract, because it says, this is a legal document. Read this entire document and information page before you sign. And it's hidden in the bottom of the contract.
Item number 24.
Item number 24.
Yeah, that's classic.
And it's not contractual, but it does, it's trying to highlight the importance of it, but it's there. Okay, so you make your offer, and you're not going to just make an offer and then walk away, and like 3 years later somebody says, hey, I took your offer, I'm accepting it. You're going to put a time frame in here for the seller to accept. And you can actually withdraw your offer, folks. You can rescind it. We talked about rescission rights before, but there's a right to rescind even before it's accepted, which is essentially saying, I'm pulling this back. I'm no longer making this offer valid. And there's a certain way to do that notice, but we make our offer, we give the seller a certain amount of time to review it, and we're going to put that date in there. And unless it's withdrawn in writing with notification to the other party of that revocation, actually, so we're going to revoke, not rescind. So it's different language and probably a different legal connotation. We're revoking the offer. Upon acceptance of the offer, counteroffer, by accepting in writing and notifying the other party of such acceptance, there will be a binding contract of purchase and sale in terms of conditions set forth. So you can't revoke after you've got word of it being accepted. It's already done. But now you can rescind. Fun. We have to declare residency or citizenship now. And again, because we have restrictions on foreign buyers, it's really important that we get our clients to confirm it. Initially, this isn't proof, but it does show that they've indicated what their citizenship is, and it also make sure we've had that conversation before we bound somebody to a contract they can't actually complete. We will witness where the buyer and seller sign. If we're doing it in person, if it's digital contract, there's no ability to witness. We're almost done, folks. Isn't this fun? How you doing, Jen? You awake?
Great.
Yeah?
I love it.
Okay. So acceptance, the seller accepts the above offer and agrees to complete the sale on terms, agrees to pay a commission of listing contract. There's that clause C again, of the buyer's commission, buyer's agent's commission, that is. And the seller signs acceptance date. This is confusing a lot of realtors right now, because this has always been here, this one form here where we date the acceptance of the contract. And sellers often ask the question, why am I signing acceptance when, let's go back to the top here, because this gets into some of the mechanics of an offer. We write the offer as the buyer's agent, we send it to the seller for review, and the seller says, I like everything about this offer, except I need the dates to change. I need a different completion date. And I want a little more money. They never say a little less money. I want a little more money, so let's cross this off. Let's put in a different amount that we like, and we're going to initial the change that we just made. And we're going to change the dates. We're going to cross those off, put in the dates that we like. We're going to change those dates. We're going to come down here and we're going to sign that we accept. Love, Sid. Sorry, you're looking for some attention, aren't you, buddy? So we're going to, where did we go here? Acceptance. So we're going to sign acceptance subject to those changes. And sellers are saying, but I haven't actually accepted. I've just made those changes. But you're accepting the contract subject to those changes. That's my understanding of how that works. That's the way we've always done it. But now we have also this rescission right, buyer's right for rescission. And we have a different date for acceptance. And where we say the date of acceptance, we now got two dates of acceptance. And we call that one now the final acceptance date. And now if we've got that contract was sent to the seller, they reviewed it, they made some changes, they sent it back to the buyer. The buyer reviews those changes and says, no, those dates don't work for me. I'll accept that price, but those dates don't work for me. I'm going to send it back to the seller. I'm going to initial the changes, send it back to the seller. Maybe they're negotiating over a couple of days' time. This final acceptance date is going to be a different date than the date above. And it's confusing realtors, and it's confusing people, the buyers and sellers. But this is the date that triggers the rescission right. And that has to be the final acceptance date. It can't be the date that the seller initially accepted, subject to those changes. Because otherwise, if there's 2 or 3 days of negotiations, that rescission period is already shortened.
So you fill that final acceptance date in once everything else has been agreed to?
The last party to do the last acceptance, whoever it is, whether it's the buyers or the sellers, when they're finally sitting in front of the contract and saying, I'm making no further changes and I'm accepting this, at that point, this date is filled in. Gotcha. Not until. And then, who the notice goes to and how it's formed and so on. So if we were just to receive a contract just like this, so 7 pages. Just like this, that's still a valid contract, but there's no additional conditions and there's none of the sort of best practices that we usually add, which are pretty standard boilerplate, what we call addendum 1 and 2. So we've got a pretty standard contract here, but we will often add these addendums 1 and 2. So addendum 1, I call this one the CYA addendum, because you were just saying earlier, like, what about property transfer tax? How do they know what they're paying? This one makes it really explicit. This one, it makes it explicit.
That'll be updated as of April 1st.
Exactly, because this is an older template that I use as an example, but we've got new property transfer tax regime, folks. So these numbers, don't look at the numbers, just look at the intention. It's that we should be explaining these things and talking them out. You should understand that the seller and buyer should understand that appliances are not sold with a warranty. That they're as is. Now, it's still supposed to be substantially as viewed, remember? So if the appliances were working when you viewed it, they should be considered working when you get your keys. But if they're not working the day after you get your keys, that's on you, the buyer. Okay. Deposits, again, just making it really clear that they don't belong to anyone. They can't be released until they've cleared financial institutions. And the release complies with the provisions of the Property Real Estate Services Act. If you want to know what those provisions are, read the Real Estate Services Act. Fireplaces, inserts, wood stoves, chimneys. It's up to you to ensure that it was installed properly. Requirements of the government authorities, getting inspections. It's the buyer's responsibility to ensure. Okay, so a lot of people will buy a place. It has a fireplace. It's not. It's there, but whether or not it works or not, or it meets compliance, that's up to us to do those investigations and find out. Property inspections. A building inspection is a pretty wide-ranging condition, and we will have the condition on addendum 2 if we've included it. But it's nice to make it clear what an inspection is. So we've said it can include the following. It can include verification of the existence of an underground soil storage tank. It can include doing, checking the buildings and outbuildings. It can include confirmation of the property boundaries. That's really hard to do on a short term, folks, and it's really hard to get a surveyor out anymore in any kind of timeline. But if there's a survey available, at least we can review that. It's also really uncommon if we see those even these days, but those are things that we have the right to do if we can do it. Checking records of the local government authorities, like going to the municipality and asking them for, records of permits and so forth. Getting an appraisal for mortgage purposes, verification of the operating condition of septic system, confirmation of the quality of well water. So it's a pretty broad term, building inspection. In Greater Victoria, there's so many different ways to look at secondary accommodation, and we realtors use so many different bits of language to describe them in our listing write-ups, because we want to be careful that we want to draw attention to the fact that there might be a second kitchen, but we also don't want to draw attention to the fact that the authorities could enforce removal of an illegal suite. And there are so many illegal suites that exist in Victoria. So it's really important. That's what this one is here. The buyer acknowledges the property could contain secondary accommodations, and they may not be permitted by the zoning bylaw or zoning bylaws applicable. And you understand that there could be a loss of income or other costs associated with that if it's discontinued. My understanding is most of the municipalities are going to enforce on a complaints basis if there's illegal secondary accommodation, but there's also safety issues when you're looking at buying a place with, because there was a time when suites were illegal in various municipalities, still in some. People putting them in illegally, so they're not getting permits. So it may not be done to code. There may be some safety issues as well as the legal issues. So it's really important to understand what you're buying. again, just going back to taxes, you have to satisfy yourself regarding the application of GST. GST is normally not applicable on a resale home, but if that home or property was used for commercial purposes, for example, an Airbnb, then GST might then apply. So it's really important to do those confirmations. Most agents now get, I shouldn't say we all, most agents now get floor plans drawn up with a listing. We used to do a lot of our own measurements. Now we're outsourcing and hiring a professional company to build actual floor plans. But there have been cases where people have been, where it's been wrong, Logan said, where it's been wrong. And, the buyer says, the floor plans say it's 1,700 square feet, but we've measured it and it's only 1,600 square feet. We are wanting to sue everyone and we're not happy. But this says you're happy with what you saw, regardless of what was in the, you went into the place, you looked around, you saw it, you felt it worked for you. So even if those floor plans are a little bit off, you're not really able to hold somebody to their feet to the fire. Because of course, no floor plan is going to be completely accurate anyway. So at what point do you start to say this is wrong? Is it 1,651 square feet versus 1,675? I don't know. Mm-hmm. So again, it's really important. This is why this is CYA. This clause, this covers things. This covers the butt of the listing agent, the selling agent, it's the buyer's agent, and just makes it sure that everything is explicit, that we've all talked about these things. So good, go and confirm the legal ramifications of any charges that remain on title. There is a positive obligation on the seller to disclose what's called a material latent defect. So although the seller does not need to disclose the gaping hole in the wall that, from, I don't know, a sledgehammer, they do have to disclose something that's hidden, could impact the value, the use, the enjoyment, the safety, that wouldn't be found in a basic building inspection. If it can be found in a standard building inspection, then it's not what's called latent. It's not hidden. So there's sort of two things here. It's got to be material to the purchase, and it's got to be latent, hidden, for it to be a defect that there's a positive obligation to disclose. But again, if in doubt, disclose if you can, because it gives the buyer a lot more confidence in what they're buying. There's some questionable areas where what is a material latent defect. There's, our industry would consider a illegal suite a material latent defect, because the true definition may not cover exactly that, but we've got some wider definitions now in our industry. It's really uncommon, like I said, to see a survey certificate, but if there is one, the seller will provide. And then this one, number 13, catches a lot of people, where there's like an oil tank on the property, and they've got their home up for sale, and they agree to sell the home, and it's closing in 3 months, and then they fill the tank with oil, and that's nice for them to do, but they're not going to get their money back for the filled tank, because whether it's a propane tank that comes with the property or an oil tank, there's no adjustments. Remember that adjustments date clause? There's no adjustments for fuel in the tanks. And if we do incorporate that, if we do attach the property disclosure statement, it's incorporated into the contract. So that's that addendum 1, which is really useful just for making, none of this is really highly contractual. This is really more clarification and nuance. And there is some contractual pieces where it's making more explicit and clear, but it's really helpful to cover that. And this version is for a residential home. If this is their conditions when a buyer says, I'm going to buy this, but only if I can get a building inspection and I'm satisfied, only if, and we can add anything. There's room to add all kinds of additional clauses. We can add additional pages with, pages and pages of additional clauses. If it was, if you're buying maybe a development property, there might be a whole bunch of extra conditions and clauses put in there. But as a general, like 90% of offers are going to be covered with financing, a building inspection, the title, fire and property insurance, which is again a requirement of financing, which is why that's there, makes it explicit. And then the property disclosure statement, if you haven't yet had a chance to read it. So to make sure that that's a condition. And then if you're buying a strata, there's a variation of this one that has all of the paperwork and all of the documents that you would be requiring to obtain and review for satisfying yourself around the strata. Really important that you use the right form with this. So Jen, why don't you talk about financing?
Well, that's a key date that you're putting in there that ideally, when I like having a conversation with a realtor, how much time, usually they call me up, how much time do you need? And depending on, because there's always different circumstances, at least a minimum of 5 business days. And the biggest one for that, quite often I can get the actual approval from a lender within 24 to 48 hours, but then it's time for the lender to review all the documents, review the purchase contract, review the MLS listing, property disclosure statement. If there's anything noted on, lots of detail on that property disclosure statement, questions go back and forth. If an appraisal is required as well, we're getting that all done in that potential 5 business day time frame.
Wonderful. Yeah. And if we were talking earlier before we started talking contracts, what happens when the buyer hasn't gotten you all the information you need that the underwriter is looking for? That could put that 5 business days even longer if they have to go and collect some documents from their employer and so forth.
And that's where I do like chatting with the realtor directly, because sometimes, everybody's different. Sometimes I've got clients that have sent me everything. We've got their pre-approval. They've done everything methodically and great. It's gone great. So you know what? We can potentially tighten that up. Or the other situation that, we haven't actually got their pre-approval in place yet. I don't have any documents. We're waiting for, whatever it may be that is going to delay the process. We might need to get more time. But
yeah. So it's really, really important that your clients understand what time you're requiring, and that the realtor that you're working with on the other side understands what time you need. Because we always want to try and keep it as short as possible, just to keep it competitive. But at the same time, too short, and then if we can't meet those dates, then we're going and asking for an extension, so we're not offside on the contract. And the seller may not want to grant it. They may have a backup offer or a lot of built-up interest that they may say, no, do it or walk away. Do it within the timelines or walk away. So it's so important to get that date right. Really important to get that date right. Thank you. So the building inspection piece, we can usually get a building inspector in within a few days. Sometimes the same day, sometimes the next day, but you may need some time to digest. And it's also expensive to get a building inspection. So I often suggest my clients wait and book it towards the end of, but not the very end of the condition period, simply so that they have a better understanding of whether their financing is going to be approved before they spend $750 on an inspection.
One key piece with this one, if something does come up in the property inspection, again, communication with the realtor, something comes up on the property inspection, you're going to reduce the price by $10,000 because they need a new roof within the next year. Depending on, communicate with your mortgage broker prior to removing those conditions, if you can, because if you're getting a significant reduction, say $10,000, because there's, the roof
vermiculite insulation, let's call it.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
That can affect your could affect your financing. So that lender then may need to go back to the insurer, CMHC, to disclose to them that, oh, we've got a reduction in the price, here's why. Will they still approve that property? So
right. And for a buyer's perspective, and even from the agents, it's like, hang on, we're reducing the price. It's making it easier to finance. Why is there a problem here? So, but from the lender's perspective, they're saying, but hang on, there's a problem with the house we hadn't anticipated. Or what's the lender's concern there? Is that what it is?
Yeah. Is the property still as marketable? Is it worth that price? Do they want to get an appraisal to confirm the value now? What else is wrong with it? Right. They may ask, those are circumstances that they would potentially ask for a copy of the home inspection. It's significant reductions in the price. That's where it can
significant. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, so getting the building inspection, again, it can cover, we talked about what a building inspection could be. It can cover a pretty wide range, and you want to definitely have a good, you want to consider what you need to do to fulfill those. Okay, you're going to get a general building inspector. They're going to do a visual inspection. It's not invasive. They don't look behind walls. They will have some equipment sometimes that is, moisture sensing or heat sensing for, finding insulation gaps and so forth. But generally speaking, they're not able to do, it's not an engineering report, and it's not it's comprehensive in scope. They're going to look at a lot of things. It's not going to be really a deep investigation. If you need specific investigations, like you're concerned about perimeter drains, hire a perimeter drain company, hire that septic company. You're going to spend now a few $1,000s in inspections, but it might help you to avoid making a bad decision or give you some guidance on what it's going to cost you. And it may give you some ammo if you do want to renegotiate your purchase price based on new information. I'd like to tell people, though, honestly, if you're buying a house and the roof is shot, you can tell it by looking at it, and you do a building inspection, and they confirm that, and then you try to negotiate the price based on that. You may not get very far because it's pretty patently obvious that that was there when you made your offer. That was there when they priced the home in the first place. You're not buying a new home, so you're going to probably find you're buying it with warts and all. Again, we may waive this if we're waiving a number of conditions. Even if we're waiving all the conditions, I always include this form anyway. So the buyers are clear on what they're waiving, that they had the option to have these and decided not to use them. But we may waive the title if it's a clean title. And we've got this clause here that the buyer acknowledges and accepts that on completion, the buyer will receive the title containing, in addition to any encumbrance referred to in section clause 9 title of this contract, any non-financial charge set out in the copy of the title search results that is attached to and forms part of this contract. So again, why we attach the contract, and also making sure that it's clear. So fire and property insurance, again, really important to go in and get your quotes on that. Ensure you can get it. And again, it's a requirement of your financing. We're at the final stage here, folks. Thank you. It's been a marathon. But again, property disclosure statement, if it wasn't incorporated into the contract, we're going to make it a condition. And if it's approved, and we have to be careful because we can either waive or fulfill a condition now. We have an option on the condition removal form to waive or fulfill it. If it's waived, then you may not actually incorporate it. You want to fulfill this is just a little side note, but I want to be careful of that. So as I said, there's room for additional bits. This is what a property disclosure statement looks like. I'm not going to go into it, but this is what we've been referring to throughout. And the seller will have filled out all kinds of information about their property disclosure statement. They may add additional notes there. They should attach a material latent defect form if there are any known material latent defects. Obviously, if you don't know about one, you can't disclose it. And this is where I'm saying, this is the form that removes, this is after 5 business days, you've gone to the bank. Jen has helped you out with getting your mortgage financing. You've done your building inspections. You're happy with everything. You're going to buy it. Then you're going to fill out this form, and essentially it's basic removal of what we had added as those conditions. We're now subtracting them, and so we're going to declare them fulfilled. And again, any additional ones that had been there. And there you go. You're now at a firm binding unconditional contract. What a bunch of fun that was. And now you are going to put your deposit in place and hope for and wait for a key day.
It's so quick and easy. I mean, I've done it myself. You're looking at these documents on your phone. You're just following along and you're initialing in the spots.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this will be a good video to just explain everything.
You know, exactly. And, you know, something you can share with your clients, just to say, hey, you know, if you're not sure about what's going on in the contract, here's an overview. So,
and important things
absolutely.
to pay attention to.
Exactly. Exactly. And maybe if trying to find somebody to make it so you can divide it up and just jump to the right section. Instead of having to wait an hour and a half for the right clause to come. But anyway, thanks, Jen, for sitting with me through this. This was a lot of fun, and it was really helpful having another set of eyes on this.
It's good to dissect it.
Yeah. And thanks to everybody for watching. And I'm going to call it here. Jen, thank you so much. Yeah.
I look forward to seeing you again soon.
See you next week.
You bet.
Okay. Bye, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Bye.